How many of you would agree to start a chess game if you knew your life depended on the result of the game? Probably not many of us. Hopefully not many of us. One man in history, however, did not have a choice. His name was Ossip Bernstein. Comment down below, if you had to play a chess game and your life depended on it, which opening would you play? I'd play the King's Gambit, go out with a bang. Hopefully none of you would play the London. That is for liberals. Unless you're playing the Jabava, then at least a Democrat or something. But anyway, speaking of communists, Bernstein was captured by the Bolsheviks and he was put on death row by firing squad. One of the commanding officers was a big fan of chess and recognized his name. He gave him the deal of a lifetime. Play me in chess. If you win, you're free to dip. If you lose or draw, you're not free to dip. Luckily, he won. He dipped to France. He got out of there, and then he's kept playing chess. And it's just wild to me, the lives these people have. Like, I'm just so fascinated by the history and the way they had to deal with playing chess. Nowadays, you can make a living off it in a multitude of ways. You can sit in front of your computer and study with the engine all day. Back then, they had none of that. This was their passion. They just went above and beyond. There were war prisoners. They were captured. They were soldiers. With all those experiences and everything, they would take like an 8 to 10 year pause during a world war and then just come back and still be a savage at chess. Just utmost respect. Totally different day and age today for some people, for a lot of people. So we get an e4, e5 opening. We get bishop b5, a Spanish. And then we get knight f6, a Berlin. Still played at top level all the time. Oh, by the way, this is not the death row game. There was no record of that, unfortunately. I wonder how it went. But I want to express how good he was at chess. And because of that, we're looking at a game where he beat Lasker, the world champion. If you beat a world champion, you're probably pretty good at chess. So let's get into it without further ado. d6, this is called the Berlin-Steinitz defense. And white's middle game idea is to play d4, as in all e4, e5 openings, just like black wants to play d5 eventually. However, you can either let it sit and marinate with c3 and then play d4 later on, or you can be a savage and play d4 right away. He chose the latter. We get bishop to d7, cutting the pin. There's many ways to play it. Knight c3, all four knights are out. We get development and rook e1. An uncastled king with a rook on e-file. Good stuff. Okay, here we finally get the exchange. We get e takes d4 and knight takes d4. Black has a few options here. He chose to castle, but let's look at what would happen if knight takes d4. If knight takes d4, do not take that guy. It's not as good. You'll have a misplaced knight on b5. Take this guy. Now, after they recapture, then you take the knight back, and they have no queenside knight to bully your queen. So your queen is actually a good piece. It's also aiming at g7. You might say, don't they have bishop f6? Yes, they do. But this queen is still not bad. You can throw in e5. See, when you're ahead in development, you can throw in moves that look unplayable like this. If the knight or the bishop takes, as you could see, the bar drops or it raises, depending on which side of the thing you're looking at. f4 exploits the fact that the piece is now pinned. So we would get d takes e5, queen b4, black not castled, or black not castle. You know how annoying it is when you can't castle? I'm sure you do. I know it. I hate when it happens. Let's say bishop e7 trying to castle. You can either be greedy and pick up the pawn, or you can play queen g4. I like queen g4 better, aiming at g7. Now if they castle, you can play stuff like bishop to h6, checkmate. And if bishop to f6, yes, it stops the checkmate, but all your pieces are perfect. All their pieces are, well, not perfect. So that means you have an advantage. Back to the game, though. We get castles. I was just going to unfold. Bishop takes c6. Okay. You could take with the bishop, but then you give up the bishop pair, and you'll damage your pawn structure anyway. So he chooses to damage his pawn structure immediately and retain the bishop pair. A long-term advantage, some would say. Bishop to g5, trying to complete development, and pawn to h6, kicking out the bishop. He doesn't want to give away his only bishop, so he slides back. Rook to e8, and now pawn to e5. What is the point of this move? Well, if they take, you get a rook lift. Rook lifts are nice. You can double up on the e file. You can slide your other rook to the d file. These bishops don't look so good. And now not only are these pawns doubled, they're doubled and isolated because they have no neighbors. No b pawn, no d pawn, double isolated pawns. That is also an isolated pawns. And look at white's structure. Perfect. So all that for the bishop pair, not buying it. We get e5, knight to h7, retreating. Now the bishops stare at each other. Now these pawns are not isolated, double isolated. We get a bishop retreat, retaining his bishop, and pawn to a5. A suspicious move, but not a bad one. He's throwing the pawn forward. He has some ill intentions coming up, I would suppose. And now we get queen d3. Pay attention to how many queen moves happen in this game. Doesn't seem like a lot yet. Just wait until the game unfolds. Bishop to f8, a retreating move, now opening up the rook on the e file. See what he has planned. And now e takes d6, c takes d6. Computer was not a fan of this, said it gave up a little bit of advantage, but we're not a fan of the computer, so who cares what it says. These are pretty weak hanging pawns, not even in the center. They're on the 6th rank. Kind of gross. Now we get a rook trade, and white is aiming in at the weak pawn. A good thing to do. Bishop to g4 does a couple things. One, it ties the queen down to the knight, because you don't want to take like that. That's pretty gross. Double isolated pawns. I'll stop saying gross. But now the rook can go to d8. So you don't want to take and then just get pinned and then lose a piece, right? You win a pawn and you lose a bishop. Do the math. Rook a d1 and pawn to d5. That is a pretty bad pawn structure, I would say. There are now holes, though yes, black is patching the holes thus far, but long-term weakness for sure. h3, kicking out the bishop or kicking the bishop forward, and now queen takes. Preserve the structure. We get knight to g5, a nice tempo gain on the queen, queen to d3. Now the queen moves start rolling in. Pawn to a4, suspicious, but he's trying to damage the pawn structure. Challenge the integrity of these beautiful pawns. King to f1. I love moves like this. Do not let that bar fool you. King to f1, savage. Point is, you could not go rook e1, and now you could go rook e1 and kick out the queen. I just love moves like this. Don't do it if your opponent has a light squared bishop. Bad things could happen, but the opponent does not have a light squared bishop. Lasker, that is. Queen to c8, a multi-purpose move. Are we going to get a sacrifice? Maybe. Are we going to get pawn to c5? Probably not. We're going to get queen a6? Also maybe. So it does a lot of things. It just has a lot of routes. That is a move that you need to consider. You need to be like, why did my opponent play that? I mean, you always need to do that in chess, but you really got to delve into that one because queen c8, no one's just mouse slipping that. They have an idea behind queen c8. Knight e2, a backwards retreating. Well, backwards retreating, that is a double entendre. Is that what that's called? It's like saying long pants, like double, whatever. You get what I'm saying. Knight to d4. Can route to f5 and aims at c6. We do get queen b7 aiming at b2 and b3. So all these moves aimed in at challenging b2, and white's just like, I'm going to go b3. But black does get something out of it. He gets, okay, knight e4, save the bishop. After a takes b3 happens, he's waiting a little bit, but black will get the open a file. That is good for him. We get bishop e3, do not get forked. We don't like that. So we get a bishop trade. Now we get a pawn trade, and this rook can do some damage. So it thinks, and so it tries. Rook to a2, aiming in at c2. Now we get pawn to f3. They say never play f3, but sometimes it's not such a bad move. Yes, you have a plethora of dark squared holes on the king side, but this knight is very, very strong. Once it moves back, it is less strong. So, win some, you lose some. Queen to d3, defending c2. Everything is defended. Knight c3, kicking away that rook that was said to do a lot. Rook to e1, if the knight moves, that is an open file. Queen to b4, and now knight to e2. So yeah, we're going to get a lot of queen back and forth and a lot of knight back and forth. But incremental progress is being made by both sides. Pawn c3. Everything is defended. You control a lot of squares on the 4th rank. He probably wants to go knight d4 and trade off knights. Let's see. Boom. Prediction of the year. Queen h2, infiltrating on the dark squares. Okay, it's starting to get a little scary, but what did black miss? Knight takes e6, and okay, rook to a2. So we're about to get checkmated. You might say, well, can we go knight f4? No. And not because of the knight, because if we take the knight, then black gets mated in one move. But if you don't take the knight, then white gets mated in one move. That's chess, right? I had mate in one, but my opponent mated me first. Moral of the story. Rook e2, disallowing mate, and now king to f2, escaping the back rank, or white's back rank in respective, or perspective. I'm saying a lot of words right now. Queen g6, I hope they make sense. Queen g6, trying to win the e6 pawn with the queen. That will come with check. Queen c7. Okay, so now we get queen takes pawn with check, and we're just up a clean pawn in a major piece endgame. Never seen that before, right? Totally wasn't in yesterday's video or 2 days ago. Yeah, these major piece endgames up a pawn are not a draw. Play for the win. Got to squeeze out this position. It's not going to be easy, but winning the one game is never easy. Let's see how he does it. Okay, we get some backwards queen moves. He's just rotating his pieces. What do you think of when you see queen to d4? I'm curious. Yes, it stagnates the pawns. In my eyes, let's say black wastes a move. Then you have something like rook e6, and you aim at both pawns. You might say, what do you mean? You're only aiming at one pawn. But that is a pin. That pawn cannot take. So it's good to look at routes like that or diagonals like that. I love those type of tactics. King h7, I would imagine it is to get out of the way of a pin, and pawn to h4. I really like pawn to h4, not just because it's defended, but because if you go h5, the king is in a perma box, and he's not going to get out. So queen d3 check, okay, king h8, queen e3, shuffling a little bit, trying to make mini improvements, and now we get rook to c8. White offers a queen trade, black declines. White offers a queen trade, black declines. But white now uncoordinated his opponent or tied him down. He's more passive, less active, and vice versa. White is way more active. That's what you want to do. That's how you grind an advantage. Okay, we get c5, desperate times call for desperate measures, but now that is a passed pawn. Black's like, okay, I'm going to make a passed pawn of my own. Don't take and lose another pawn in between, rook d8. But this allows white to get the queen trade he's been seeking. We got queen takes, rook takes, and the reason black was forced to do this is because he needs to pick up one pawn. He can't go down two pawns. But white's coordination is key. The game is about to end. We get b6, rook behind the passed pawn, b7, that is defended. Why is this so bad for black? Well, check, promote. That is why. So to stop that, black played king to h7. Okay, so we are tied down and we are viewing it from the side, but essentially this is Zook's one. His next move, gangster, pawn to h6. Puts the king in a box, puts the pawn, pins the pawn to the king. So this king literally cannot move. This pawn cannot move. And black really just cannot make a move. So after h5, he resigned. Possible ways this could have continued are king to e3, king to d2, and just march the king forward. Right, they're going to move the rook, might check you again, but now you pick up the pawn. And essentially, wherever they check you, you're just going to hide, and your rook's on the 7th, so honestly, it's even easier. Whether they come here, whether they come here. King protects the promotion square, check, no bueno, rook c7, and you win the game. So, a fascinating game. And yeah, could you think of any chess player with a crazier story than Ossip Bernstein? Hard to imagine. Let me know if you do. Hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.